Dr. N. Sri Kumar is an assistant professor of philosophy in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. He is a gold medalist for MA Philosophy from the Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam. He did his MPhil and PhD in philosophy from the Central University of Hyderabad and specializes in the areas of philosophy of language, continental philosophy, and hermeneutics. He has been into the academic profession since 1995 and is taught in Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi, Kerala and BITS Pilani, Rajasthan before joining the IIT Madras in 2003. Dr. Sri Kumar has published articles in various journals and has presented papers in national and international seminars. Some of the courses he offers include European philosophy, contemporary German philosophy, Introduction to Indian philosophy, philosophical hermeneutics, philosophy and critical theory, and philosophy of language.
Welcome to the UGC lecture series in philosophy on Phenomenology and Existentialism part 10. Before we start today's lecture, let me introduce the two students, Mr. Lenin CC and Mr. Badrinath.
Hello sir.
Today's lecture, this episode will be covering the following topics: phenomenology, the fundamental problems involved in phenomenology, the issue of isolating essences. This is something which we have already discussed, the concept of essences. We have discussed how this notion is being discussed in the framework of Platonic thought, and today we will be seeing how this notion is further developed by the empiricist to image theory, which Husserl criticizes, analysis of propositions, to facts about experience, principle of intentionality, and empiricist image theory and Husserl's response to that. So, these are the topics, and about the principle of intentionality will be the focal theme in today's episode. The problem, how these essences are given in our experience. We have been talking about essences, and we have said that phenomenology is primarily concerned about essences and not about objects. See, the question which Badri asked in the last episode, object giving intuition. So, we are not concerned about the objects or object giving intuition, rather we are concerned about essences. How essences are given in experience is the issue here, and description of the essential features of everyday lived experiences will reveal this. You have to, the description of the essential features of everyday lived experiences. The world we experience is well accounted, because this is the world, everyday lived experiences. So, this is well accounted here, and here fundamental problem of phenomenology describing the essential features of everyday lived experiences accurately and completely. You need an accurate and complete description of the essential features of everyday lived experience, the experiences we have of the world and the experiences that present. See, here the emphasis is on experiences, the experiences that present the world to us, and not just for experience of the world. It is the experiences that present the world to us, presents the world directly to us. We could also see how Husserl counters the empiricist conception here with this notion of experience, where the world experiences that present the world to us, while the empiricists are largely representationalist. They do not believe in presenting the world directly to us, they always believe in a kind of representationalism, but here the world is directly given to you, in the sense the essences are given to you, because it is the essences which constitute the domain of phenomena about which all knowledge is concerned. Now, essential features of experience. Here the reference is to those features that are necessary and sufficient for them to be experiences. See, something which I have already said about the musical note. So, a musical note, to be a note, share something with it, has to, there should be an essence. So, similarly the features that are necessary and sufficient for them to be experiences. So, here reference is to that, so that you can tackle the essences directly. These essence, the essence of everyday, so that is what the primary concern is, the essence of everyday lived experiences and how to isolate these essences. Here now we will approach the problem from a different direction. We will temporarily stop our discussion on these essences there, and now we try to address this whole issue of isolating essences from a different direction. Here we could see that science is a system of interconnected propositions. Every science is nothing but a system of interconnected propositions, and these interconnections are by means of inferential relations, various inferential relations which are logical in nature, and how to develop a general theory of inferential systems, which will be a theory of science, because we could see that phenomenology as a grand project envisaged by Husserl was expected to provide foundation for all sciences. So, to develop a general theory of inferential system probably would contribute in the line of developing or construing phenomenology as a foundational discipline. Husserl is a thoroughgoing foundationalist. The best way to study the nature of science is, which is a propositional system. Science is nothing but, I have already mentioned, it is a propositional system, is to start with its linguistic manifestations, how language is, how scientific truth or science gets expressed through linguistic expressions. Focus is on sets of statements or sentences and assertive utterances in science, or in other words propositions. We are concerned about propositions, and analysis of propositions occupies a major place now, because ultimately this analysis leads to the knowledge of the real nature of science, the formal relations between propositions. And yeah,
how does Husserl's analysis of propositions is different from that of analytical philosophy?
Okay. Yes, analytical philosophers are also preoccupied with language analysis in a very significant way, major way, particularly in the initial stages. Philosophers like Bertrand Russell, Wittgenstein in his early period, they were all very particularly concerned about analysis of propositions and all that. But the major difference could be like when see, that is what I am going to, I was about to explain it, the content of propositions. When it comes to the content of propositions, the analytical philosophers, particularly the initial stages, they were emphasizing on the representational content of propositions. And even in the later period, even Wittgenstein for example in his later period, though the analysis of quote unquote propositions were not of a major concern then, because he was dealing with language as it is being used in our day to day life. Here Husserl was focusing on the mental states that typically invoked propositions. So, the focus is on the mental states that invoke propositions by Husserl, which is different from the analytical tradition. Here how linguistic utterances come to be the intentional structures that they are. So, linguistic utterances are understood as intentional structures, and how, this is the question here. And analysis of propositions further, to study the units of consciousness. See, here the analysis of propositions is directly concerned with the study of the units of consciousness that the respective speaker presents himself as having, that he quote unquote gives voice to in expressing the proposition in question. So, here again units of consciousness, the focus is on consciousness. Then how these propositions come to be mental states that are characteristically of, about, or directed toward objects and states of affairs in the world. So, yeah.
Sir, if I may interrupt you.
Yeah, please.
Why do you use the terms of and about, and what do they signify?
Correct. Phenomenology is concerned about the study of consciousness, and what is the nature of consciousness. And phenomenology, even Husserl has invested a lot in trying to understand the phenomenon of consciousness, and he has said that from his teacher Brentano, who was a psychologist, he has taken the concept of intentionality, the principle of intentionality, which says that every consciousness is about something. Consciousness is always consciousness about something. So, this is what is called the intentionality principle, which we will be explaining later in detail. So, that is why it is directed toward objects. Just because you are concerned about consciousness which is happening inside your mind does not mean that you are concerned only about a subjective world or the domain of the subjectivity. No, consciousness, though it belongs to an inner domain, it is necessarily directed toward objects and state of affair in the world outside it. So, the intentional structure of consciousness takes us out of our minds to the world. Okay. So, this directed toward the world is very important to understand the concept of consciousness, and this analysis reveals, see, we are going to see that two important facts about our experience. Number one, everyday experience, like the linguistic utterances they make possible, are intentional, which I have already explained. Our everyday experiences as well as the linguistic utterances which they make possible, they are intentional. They point outward, they are about something, they are directed towards something. Number two, experiences always reveal their objects from a perspective. They reveal their objects from a perspective. So, perspectival nature of experience. This is also these two factors, the intentionality aspect and the perspectivism, we can call it. These two aspects are two major important facts about experience as far as the phenomenological understanding of human experience is concerned. Now, the question is how to reconcile the objectivism of intentionality with perspectivism.
Again, sir.
Yeah, please.
What do you mean by when you say the word perspectivism?
Okay. See, perspectivism means that your knowledge is perspectival, your experience, you see an object from a particular point of view, you can say from a particular point of view. When I say it is perspectival in this sense, see, you do not have to think in terms of Gadamerian perspective where the prejudices come into picture and all that. Okay. Of course, it also contributes in making your perceptions and experiences perspectival, but here the direct reference is that it presents, every experience is perspectival, so that it presents or it gets an object from a particular point of view. Okay. Now, the question is how to reconcile the objectivism of intentionality, because intentionality is that which makes experiences objective, because it takes you outside your subjective mind, and perspectivism locks you in a very limited domain. So, how to reconcile this? This is the issue here. So, we were dealing with the question how to reconcile the objectivism of intentionality with the perspectivism, the point of view of experience, and here the phenomenological account of intentionality is will answer this question. Principle of intentionality, which I have already explained as way of an answer to your question. It is consciousness, it deals with consciousness. Consciousness is always consciousness about something. This aboutness, quote unquote, points to something outside the mind which is conscious of the object. So, it takes us outside the mental subjective domain to an objective domain. Okay. So, that is the significance of this concept, and we will see the various connotations, how this concept of intentionality is being evolved in Husserlian philosophy and all that in the subsequent lectures. Now, we will approach this concept from a different perspective. Everyday experiences are intentional, no doubt, and they are all directed towards objects, properties and state of affairs, and though experiences can reveal its objects from a perspective. See, this is what I was saying, experiences always reveal their objects from a perspective. It is full, I mean, even though it is always perspectival, still the object which is revealed in experience is a full three-dimensional object toward which we are intentionally directed when we have an experience of it. It is not that you get some image or you get some impressions or you get some sense data, what the empiricist would call it, but rather you experience a three-dimensional object as such. So, this is what Husserl was trying to emphasize on. It is here Husserl is different from Plato and the empiricist school. Okay, here he wanted to assert the three-dimensional object which is given to experience, and different modes of consciousness you have, like presentation, when you present something, presentation, judgment, love, hate, desire, all these are, see, of something, intentionality. All modes of different modes of consciousness, they are all directed towards something. So, essentially point outward to them, and objects are presented in experience as, see, as transcending or going beyond of the experience we have of them. See, it is in this way you reconcile the objectivism of intentionality with perspectivism. Objects are presented in experience as transcending or going beyond the experience we have of them. What do you mean by going beyond of the experience we have of them? It means the experience we have of them is perspectival, a particular point of view. I see an object only from a particular point of view, but the intentionality aspect, see, I could see the pen which is there in your pocket. I see it from my particular point of view. I do not know what is happening on the other side of the pen, but still, though my experience is always directed towards the object, experience is always giving the object from a particular point of view and perspective. Since it is directed toward the three-dimensional object, the pen in your pocket, okay, it goes beyond the experience I have of it, which is confined to the perspective from where, the point of view from where I look at it. Okay. So, in a sense, presented in experience as transcending, objects are present in experience as experience is perspectival and presents its object to us as transcending the perspective and principle of intentionality. So, it is, this is the major function which the intentionality principle serves in Husserlian thought. And now we could see how he has evolved this concept of intentionality, this whole notion of intentionality, which is going to occupy a central place in all of Husserl's further contemplations. Here there are mainly two influences. Number one, the empiricist account of perception, and number two, Franz Brentano's account of mental states in terms of intentionality. And Brentano, as I have already mentioned earlier, is Husserl's teacher. Okay. So, empiricist account and Brentano's descriptive psychology, where he explains the theory of the doctrine of intentionality. Empiricist account, perception. See, empiricism is a philosophical school which had emphasized the importance of perception. I mean, they always say that experience is the source of our knowledge, and perception is the most important form, or rather we can say that it is the representativity of all human experience. Perception is the most fundamental and paradigmatic mental state. You get sensations which the mind works on it and you perceive the world. Perception is in essence perspectival, a factor which we have already seen. And now Husserl accepts, to a great extent, Husserl also accepts what the empiricist had to say about human experience and all that, and perception. Experience is the ultimate source of thought, no doubt. Even for Husserl, experience is the ultimate source of thought. It's here it differs from Plato. Plato never considered experience as important at all, rather he considered it as an impediment for real knowledge. And perception of physical things is the paradigmatic kind of experience. Here for Husserl also, this empiricist assumption is accepted, and here all other experiencing acts derive a major part of their grounding force from perception. So, that is what I said, perception is representative of all other sort of experiences, and then perception of physical things is the representative of all other perceptions of qualities, processes, etc. Now, the empiricist theory, we will have a little more attention given to the empiricist theory of perception. Perception is intentionally directed to physical objects in the world, in virtue, see how, this is the question, and it is here Husserl differs. Husserl and the entire phenomenological tradition differs from the original empiricist, classical empiricist conception. Perception is intentionally directed to physical objects. in the world. That is true for both empiricism and Husserl. But for the empiricist, this intentionality or this directed toward objects in the world is by virtue of the similarity that obtains between the internal image and the physical object it is an image of. So, here comes representationalism. Here comes the image theory, the controversial image theory, which according to Husserl is extremely objectionable. The world is not directly given, rather it is the image which is you have with you, and the similarity between the image and the world, that makes knowledge possible. So, there are a lot of complications in between as far as the empiricist theory is concerned, and here the empiricists develop the theory of perceptual representation from the laws of perspectives of the Renaissance painters. See, Renaissance painters were emphasizing on the various perspectives, the laws of perspectives we can rather call it. Let us see a couple of paintings by this is the famous painting by Michelangelo, The Last Judgment, where the Last Judgment, the Judgment Day, how he has depicted it, nobody has seen it, nobody has perceived it, but he is expressing it from a particular perspective, from certain assumptions he has. Okay. So, this makes the one of the major functions of art. The Renaissance artist reasserted that one of the major functions of art is representation. And here another famous painting by Raphael, it is one of the masterpieces, considered as one of the masterpieces by the master painter Raphael, Holy Family, where you would see the Holy Family, the baby Christ in his mother's lap. Contribution of these painters, like the two painters Michelangelo and Raphael and various other painters who belong to this era, what we directly perceive is internal, perspectively rendered images of objects. We can never see, we can never assess reality directly. What we directly perceive is something which is internal, something which is in our mind, the image which is created inside my mind. What is outside, we are not aware of it, we can never know that, and we immediately perceive pictures or images instead of full three-dimensional objects, hence perception is perspectival. See, we can never perceive, we immediately perceive only pictures or images, not the objects, three-dimensional objects. And here you could recall what Husserl was asserting, that the object with which Husserl is concerned with this intentionality principle is the three-dimensional object. It is not a mere image, but the three-dimensional object.
Mention the word three-dimensional, you mean the object as a whole?
Yeah, the whole object as a whole. See, we may not perceiving the object as a whole at a particular time, okay, that may not be possible. Only then, you know, for the, now with the recent technology it is possible to have a three-dimensional image where you have cameras around the object and you capture the image of the object, but we are all beings who have a lot of limitations. We are not gods. If we have the eye of a god, probably we can see objects from all perspectives, from all points of view. That is impossible. So, ours is always confined to some dimension, and this three-dimensionality is something again which is limited to us. We will never get the three-dimensional image of an object, we can only get one particular point of view. Okay. So, now we will have this, we will carry this discussion in our subsequent lectures. Now, before we conclude, let us see what Husserl had to say briefly about this image. See, you see the picture of a tree. When we see a tree, we do not see the tree image, this is what Husserl was saying, or a packet of sense data, but the tree itself. Though it is perspectival, we do not say that, you know, I am seeing a packet of sense data, like what Berkeley once said, that seeing a stone, Berkeley said, what is it? The image of a stone, the idea of a stone. I get an idea of a stone, then he got his leg hit on the stone, then what happened? idea of pain. He would not say that I have pain, but he would always insist to say that idea of pain, and he would say that I would speak with the vulgar and think with the wise. So, that distinction Husserl cannot entertain. Here he says that you see a tree, a three-dimensional object, not a mere image of his. These experiences are not of images or things, but they are experiences. Okay. So, he was really trying to go beyond empiricism. We will see these topics in the next meeting, and now we will summarize what we have discussed today. The development of Husserl's doctrine of experience, what he meant by experience, the two aspects of experience. See, reconciliation of perspectivism with intentionality of experience. So, probably this is the most important theme which we have discussed in today's episode, and Husserl's rejection of image theory of the empiricists, which we have very briefly seen. We will be seeing the details in the subsequent lectures. Now, students can take up the following questions. What is perspectivism of experience? This is an issue which Badri was concerned with largely today's discussions. Number 2, what is intentionality? So, you have to briefly explain what is intentionality, and number 3, what is image theory. These issues we will be discussing in the subsequent lectures. Thank you.